Democracy is a word that gets thrown out a lot, but I think especially as we see the resurgence of fascist politics across the world, the rise of demagoguery and the ever-present personality cult phenomenon, I find it essential that we go back to what would seem to be a basic question of politics, which is that of democracy. What is it? How does it work? What sort of strategies enable it? Here I would like to give some philosophical ponderings about democracy, some of the questions that it asks, some of the terms that it calls into question, some of the conversations that it makes us have, and the way that it can facilitate conversations. And I'm always guided by the words of Hilary Putnam in his A Reconsideration of Dewey and Democracy, where he writes, "Democracy is not just a form of social life among other workable forms of social life. It is the precondition for the full application of intelligence to the solution of social problems. It is a structure that allows us to live life to its fruition. It allows us to express ourselves freely in a way that allows us to feel the full force of our ideas and allow them to be expressed amongst and in competition with others. And I think that it's really important that we sift through the weeds of democracy so that we don't succumb to a sort of lax, laissez-faire understanding of democracy as an anything-goes perspective. This is the kind of straw man, frankly, that we see in Plato's writing, where he theorizes that democracy is basically the last straw as people try to wrest authority into their own hands, but they don't know what's good for themselves, so it's soon going to crumble. We see this in Cicero, too, among other political theorists. And what I'm really interested in doing is seeing democracy as something much more nuanced, something like a pragmatic heuristic that we use to structure our lives in a productive way. At the heart of the democratic way of life is a tolerance of difference. And tolerance is a choice word here. Not necessarily acceptance, because it's not always wise to accept everything around one. This would be to be so open-minded that one's brain falls out. No, it is tolerance of that which is different from one, that which challenges one's perspective, calls one's ideas into question, confuses one, upsets one, offends one even. All of this is essential to the very liminal state that is democracy. It's always teetering on the edge of being a little bit too much. This is one of the things I love about the United States so much, is I can be walking down the street and I can hear a Spanish-speaking family talking amongst themselves. I can hear a Russian man on the phone. I can hear a Portuguese radio station. I can get Cuban food, right? I can absorb all of this difference, and I can just be in its presence. And I can find a way not to commodify it or try to speak for the people whose culture it represents, but merely I can accept and tolerate their difference. I don't have to like every food that I try, love every language that I hear, or be wedded to all the views of every person that I interact with. It is merely an acceptance of tolerance as a basic heuristic for life. But there is notably a paradox in tolerance, and this has been called the tolerance paradox. Are we to be tolerant of intolerance? What happens when we have a space of openness where different voices can express themselves, different ideas be brought forth, and then a bigot comes on the scene, or someone who would threaten freedom with violence, someone who would close down that open space with intolerance? Well, the tolerance paradox, paradoxically enough, demands that we be intolerant of intolerance. That if you want to participate in this democratic space, you have to be tolerant only to that which opens up the spaces. That which closes them, forestalls conversation, prevents dialogue and discourse. This cannot be tolerated, not because it has some absolute inferior status. We can find societies where this sort of bigotry is welcome and in fact is the norm, is the status quo. But the democratic society has as its status quo merely heuristics, not any essential content, anything that you must espouse, anything that you must believe in. It merely has ways of being, ways of believing, ways of interacting with each other. So we can see that democracy is a very open structure, which is trying to open up a table at which all can sit. But how do we butt up to the fact that not everyone is already sitting at the table? There are various socioeconomic disparities, religious disparities, personal and psychological and biological disparities that prevent everyone from being on an equal footing. Well, this is where the theory of equity comes in, which is different than equality. Because as Aristotle says, equals should be as equals, unequals should be as unequals. This is the sort of, oh yeah, I preach equality, but really I'm going to define ahead of time that these people are unequal to the rest of us and therefore they should stay where they are. It assumes that equality always has been and inequality always has been. Whereas equity contrasts with this strongly and says that no, any disparity is a historical contingency. It comes because of various cultural, material, ideological conditions, and it causes things to be the way they are. As a result, equity comes on the scene, and it says that we should strive for an equality that takes into account these preconditions that already exist, right? The fact that if someone has less money, for example, they won't have the same access to the same opportunities that the people already sitting at the table were. And therefore, we shouldn't privilege those who already are sitting at the table, even if it would seem that we should be treating everyone equally. No, we should treat the ones who are unequal more unequally precisely by giving them greater benefits, greater advantages. Therefore, there is a disparity, there is a discrimination in treatment going on here. And oftentimes this is the objection to equity, that it is just another form of discrimination. And yes, in a sense it is, only if we understand discriminate in its literal, technical, analytical sense, to recognize a distinction or to differentiate. Discrimination is an essential aspect of epistemology, of the philosophy of knowledge, of how we come to know different things, is that we can discriminate between them. We can piece them out and say that this is one thing, this is another, and I can assess various qualities about them, and I can act in certain ways towards them. And politics should accept this, the fact that there are differences, differences which exist because of history, differences which exist because of definition, because of ideology, because of the mere facts of language or the circumstances of place and location and geography. And to discriminate in equity merely means to take account of the differences which exist and figure out and recognize that it is the effects of discrimination that matters. And therefore, not all discrimination is equal. Some discrimination is good. It privileges those in underprivileged situations, and it deprivileges those who already have privilege. And of course, as the saying goes, for someone who has privilege, equality feels like oppression. So people who are in very privileged positions tend to assume that this is some sort of oppression, discrimination against them. But it's not against them, it's just for someone else. So it feels like it's against you. As a result, equity recognizes that it's a matter of finding strategies to mitigate discrimination as much as possible. And where it is applied, it should be applied to the lowest. This is part of John Rawls's theory, that we should treat everyone as equals and give them equal opportunities, but where this cannot plausibly happen, where there are existent differences that prevent us from justly treating everyone as equals, we must have those differences apply to the benefit of the lesser, to those less fortunate. Therefore, we acknowledge the social function of discrimination in organizing and enabling identity, and we use it selectively to better everyone from the ground up, rather than assuming that there is some pre-existing upper state that the lower must simply reach with their own efforts, right? Democracy is about benevolence, and it's about recognizing the fact that no man is an island, that every island is contingent upon the contingencies of each of its members, and that as such, everyone shares the burden in the outcomes of each, that the effects of the part are representative of the whole, and the whole is representative of each of its parts. And this exchange is often talked about in the way of the marketplace of ideas. That there is a freedom of the exchange of information, of ideas. And crucially, there is a distinction between informing or persuading and paternalistically intervening, as Hilary Putnam has called it. In the same essay that I quoted earlier, Putnam talks about societies in which there are mistreatments of women en masse. For example, let's use Afghanistan. Afghani women are not provided the freedoms to walk around unaccompanied, to have their hair uncovered, to speak in many public places. These are all things that many Afghani women may just assume is the norm, and therefore they might not necessarily be unsatisfied with it because they don't know that there's something else. And Putnam comes on the scene and he says, okay, there are some who are so relativistic and so intent on an isolationist approach to society, where you have your way, I have my way, they are equal, and we have no barometer by which to decide that someone is being oppressed in one from the perspective of the other. And Putnam comes on the scene and he says, well, we have to consider the value of personal satisfaction that this relativist is assuming. That what matters is that each isolated body politic is satisfied internal to itself. And Putnam says that this is opposed to the openness of democracy, which seeks to cross ideological and state and geographical boundaries. It seeks to create dialogue and open up new ideas. And while the colonialist wants to come into foreign cultures and paternalistically impose, to institute male chauvinism, as Putnam calls it, they want to forcibly tell the other culture that this is the right way to do it. Putnam maintains that there is another way that is ethical, which is the value of informing another. The fact that others have the right to know information. Therefore, he says, the fact that someone feels satisfied with the situation means little if the person has no information or false information concerning either her own capacities or the existence of available alternatives to her present way of life. The real test is not what women who have never heard of feminism say about their situation. Indeed, it is hard to see how the situation of a chauvinist woman in India is different from the situation of a chauvinist woman in this country 30 years ago, who had never been exposed to feminist ideas. Such women might well have answered a questionnaire by saying that they were satisfied with their lives. But after realizing the falsity of the beliefs on which the acceptance of their lives had been based, the same women not only felt dissatisfied with those lives, but they sometimes felt ashamed of themselves for having allowed such a belief system to be imposed upon them. And this shame at being ignorant of what could be is not a personal fault on those people. It's a matter of their cultural conditions that allowed them to have access to certain information. And therefore, Putnam values and valorizes the ability of democracies to exchange information, and that this is an essential duty that one has, is not merely to appease another culture by ceding to what they consider comfortable or status quo. It is to accept that personal comfortability is not an absolute. That, again, democracy is always titillating and making us uncomfortable by pushing us out of what seems comfortable, right? What seems like it's normal and just is. It shows us that there are many alternate possibilities and asks us to experiment. And this experimentation means that democracy is always a liminal state and never an absolute. Because it is a way of life, every democracy is a way of life among many's. And therefore, democracy is just a pragmatic heuristic. It has status because it is valuable precisely insofar as we find it valuable for the way we happen to find it best to run our societies. That's a lot of question begging there, right? Who is we? How do we and what do we find the best way to run our societies? Well, this will depend on different groups, on different people, how they appraise their own situation, and how they maintain openness to the possibility of new ones. Therefore, democracy is not an absolute a priori necessity, but it is the best worst option, right? And a good democracy, furthermore, is not natural. It is created and it is maintained through work, education, and attentiveness. And democracy fails and falls as ignorance, demagoguery, and complacency rise. And that's why I find it pertinent to make this lecture. Because right now, demagogues like Trump are ruining the possibilities of democracy, not only on a cultural level, but on a political level, forestalling the possibilities for us to properly participate in our political systems, for people to have the basic sorts of aspects of healthcare and of freedoms that seem to be necessary for a democratic society. And as such, I think that all of these philosophical musings that I've talked about should really make one think about the value of democracy, and that every situation and every act under this current administration is acting against that goal. So that being said, that's it for this lecture. It's been kind of short and pell-mell, but hopefully some of these ideas have been helpful. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic lit. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you'd just like to donate to the channel, because it really helps me buy the books necessary to bring you content, but no pressure, care about yourself first. That being said, that's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.